How's everyone's shooting going? So we're talking about insiders and outsiders tonight, and that's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Photographer and critic Teju Cole asked the question, can the truth of a given community only ever be told by an insider? And I think this is a quote that I go back to a lot as I think about my work, which has, for the last 8 years, been primarily in Africa. This is not where I'm from, but it has been the longest home I've ever known as an adult. It's a place that means a tremendous amount to me. And it's also a place in which I'll never fully be from. So this quote by Teju Cole is really interesting to me. He says, "Sympathy is often not enough. It can be condescending. Telling the stories in which we are complicit outsiders has to be done with imagination and skepticism. It might require us not to give up our freedom, but to prioritize justice over freedom. It is not about taking something that belongs to someone else and making it serve you, but rather about recognizing that history is brutal and unfinished, and finding some way within that recognition to serve the dispossessed. Combined with intuition, scrupulous context, and moral intelligence, it has a chance to become truth. Unalloyed, it is worse than nothing." I don't believe in the maxim of good insiders and bad outsiders. The world we work in is more complex than that, and holistic storytelling demands diverse perspectives. I'm an American, and some of the most insightful coverage of my own country has come from outsiders, like Alexis de Tocqueville, who in 1831 wrote the book Democracy in America, which continues to be present today, and Robert Frank, a Swiss photographer who probably made the most foundational book of photography on America. But I do want to talk a little bit about my journey and how I've come to understand these complexities. I began my career in the Middle East. I lived in Beirut, Damascus, and Istanbul, and much of my early work focused on conflict. An American being medevaced out of Afghanistan, the descent into civil war in Libya, and in South Sudan, a child who had died of malnutrition. I think the longer I did this work and the more I thought about it, the more I came to realize that I was maybe looking for the most dramatic but least important part of these histories, the contact but not the connection. And that really transformed the type of work that I'm trying to do today. I began a 2-year project in Somalia looking at the root causes of conflict and the sort of lack of recognition of the environmental degradation and climatation, how that has played into this lack of security in a place that too many parts of the world write off as a lost cause. The work began with the discovery of an archive of thousands of photos. These were taken in the late 1970s and early 80s by bush plane and ground truthing from across the country. It's the only ever land survey created in Somalia. And when I discovered these photos, it made me really want to understand how things had been transformed, what they looked like today. So using these old hand-drawn maps, I crisscrossed across the country trying to sort of find and map the same locations. And what I found, unfortunately, was very real and very dramatic change. Ultimately, though, it was the human element, the people I met in the process of rephotographing these locations, that came to matter the most. This is a woman named Ayan. She's 16, and I met her 2 weeks after her uncle had been killed over a dispute over land, which is growing increasingly scarce, as is water in this part of northern Somalia. This is an elder in a village in Puntland who's facing mass land degradation, and it's making nomadic communities have to go further and further to find grazing land for their camels and cows and goats. This is the old colonial building that had been degraded and was falling apart in a place called Sheikh in northern Somaliland. And this is the port of Mogadishu, the boats coming in at dawn. This is a man named Daoud, who's a single father of 9. And it reminds me a little bit of Edward's story because he had been forced to cut down the only tree in his compound, the tree that had provided shelter for his animals when a drought hit and all of his animals died, and he realized the only way that he could keep his children alive was to cut down the same thing that had protected the family for generations. This is a hawk taking flight in a place called Maid. This is an ancient port city that has become almost entirely left behind. People have fled. There's no way to make a living there anymore. This is in Bosaso. This is a fishing village. And one of the things that I tried to look at in this project was the root causes of piracy. I think a lot of people write this off. We know it as the movie or, Captain Phillips. And when I talked to people here, they told me, there was no one to protect us. Our land was being degraded. Our waters were being invaded by illegal foreign fishing vessels. The only thing we could do was to go out and try to protect ourselves. And so men like this gentleman took to the seas, became pirates, and that's one, I think, a very under-recognized cause of something that we think we know a lot about, but need to take a closer look. This is in the port of Mararo, Ethiopian and Somali migrants on their way to these caves where they were waiting for smugglers who would take them across the port to Yemen and eventually to the Gulf. This is a woman in a place called Ainabo who had to leave, was basically packing up her home after generations because the wells in her town had, for several seasons, gone dry. And this is in Dadaab refugee camp in northern Kenya, which was at the time the largest refugee camp in the world. This is a madrasa where children were learning. And I met a man there named Mohammed who had fled. And it was really interesting because I'd been covering Somalia since early 2011, but mainly from a news perspective. And doing this reporting really made me realize how important it is, the questions that we ask. The questions that we ask ourselves and the question that we ask the people whose lives we're covering. Because I had had so many people, I was there in 2011 when people fled Somalia, and I had heard about all of the challenges of living under al-Shabaab. But when I really asked people why they fled, when I really dug deep, they didn't leave because of al-Shabaab. They lived for years under al-Shabaab. It was challenging. There were large parts of it that they found extremely difficult. But they left because of drought. And I met a man named Mohammed who talked about his fears of having to go back and what the future would hold for his children. This is the last photo from Dadaab refugee camp. So, how photographers tell stories, how they define their own relationships to the people and issues they cover, and how their lives impact the stories they tell are vital issues to working responsibly anywhere. But perhaps most importantly here in Africa, where issues of representation have been so completely skewed for far too long. I've called Kenya home for the last 8 years, but I'll never be able to tell the stories of Kenya in the way that a Kenyan would. My perspective is different, and I think we have to recognize how critical it is when we look at the future of the media, that we have a far, far greater sense of diversity in the stories that we hear. If we lack that, our vision of the world grows smaller. Our vision of ourselves grows smaller. And that's part of why I'm incredibly grateful to be a contributor to Everyday Africa, alongside Edward and Andrew and Sarah and many others here. We're a collective of photographers working together to broaden perceptions of the continent beyond the headlines. And it's been a wonderful and cathartic space for me to share images that often don't, get cut from the magazine or they get cut from the newspaper. And to learn a tremendous amount from my friends and colleagues. I wanted to share this video with you, which I made for a Kickstarter that we did a couple years ago to produce the Everyday Africa book, and I think you'll recognize some familiar faces.
Hi, my name is Edward Ichalu.
I'm Peter DeCampo.
Nichole Sobecki.
Hi, I'm Glenna Gordon.
Christina Risk.
Idil Ibrahim.
Mahmoud Khattab.
Holly Pickett.
Yasamana Ashimbarandarova. Jane Hahn.
Ricky Shryak.
Salam.
I'm Girma Bertha.
I'm Barry Christensen.
Sarah Terry.
Hi everybody, I'm Austin. I'm one of the co-founders of Everyday Africa.
I joined Everyday Africa because it's a fascinating platform. It shows a different side of the continent.
I'm proud to be part of Everyday Africa, an exciting platform where I share images of my everyday experience and encounters.
Things that happen along the way to your final destination are just as important as getting there.
I like being part of Everyday Africa because it helps me inform and educate the continent and the rest of the world about our cultures, about our lifestyles, and most importantly, what it means to be African.
To help balance the narrative of what life is like across the continent.
I joined Everyday Africa to help shed light and show a different side of the continent that we don't often get to see.
The moments that are beautiful, quirky, boring, real.
Everyday Africa is a platform that is helping change the perceptions millions of people all over the world have about Africa.
Because there's value in every single story that comes out of the continent, and we get to share that as a collective voice.
Great. So I just want to say one more thing before we start this panel. The best thing for me about this job is that it's enabled me to discover other people's lives, sometimes in ways that are deeply intimate and always with empathy. But there's a battle between human curiosity and universalizing the experiences of others. When you're a photographer, you have to balance how you talk about your subject or how you even think about your subject, and you have to be prepared to be wrong. The one thread that I find throughout all of my work is that it's always changing me. And the best thing that I can do is to welcome that process. It's really an honor to be here with you all and to be in conversation about these important topics, so thank you.